HomeWord. I'm Jim Burns. You know, it's crazy. With all the hours in a day that most of us have, we spend it on social media dealing with our marriages. Yeah, that's good. Chasing the kids. That's needed. For me, grandkids and work. But yet, so many people are lonely, and loneliness has reached epidemic proportions. Even since COVID, it's gotten harder. Far too many of us have lost the art of connection and the art of just building relationships. And frankly, it's killing us. Hey, get this. In 2018, I read this in the book by our guest, the United Kingdom, so that's where I got my PhD, in that beautiful place, Great Britain, they actually had their first minister of loneliness in their government. Amazing. Well, my guest today is Dr. Mark Mayfield, and he knows loneliness, and he also has written a wonderful book that I highly recommend, and it's called The Path Out of Loneliness. I have wanted Mark on this podcast since the day we started this podcast, and he's a great guy. Dr. Mark Mayfield is a former pastor. He's an award-winning author. He's a speaker. He's a mental health counselor, assistant professor of clinical mental health counseling at Colorado Christian University. He also partners with a great organization called the American Association of Christian Counselors as the director of practice and ministry development and editor of Marriage and Family, a Christian journal. That's a mouthful. A lot of great stuff he's doing. Hey, today we're talking about the path out of loneliness. Mark, it is so good to finally get you on our podcast.
Yeah, Jim, it's been great. I've been looking forward to this since we got it scheduled.
Yeah, well, good. Well, we need a drum roll. Maybe our producer, Mike, can make a drum roll here because I really have one. I'm so happy about this. I want to talk about, of course, your book, Loneliness, and I love the book, by the way. I just read it. When I was a freshman in college, the dean of students at Azusa Pacific University was talking to some of us who are leaders. And he said, if you're a Christian leader, the odds are you will sometimes be lonely. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I was like 17 years old when I went to college when I was 17. I didn't understand that. But today I do. Mm-hmm. And I want you to unpack a phrase where you said there is a personal cost to loneliness. What did you mean by that?
Man, I'm glad you asked that question. I had the privilege today of speaking at Cornerstone University's Chapel to the Students and talking about this very topic. And the recent research is showing that loneliness, pervasive loneliness, is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
It's equivalent to having cardiovascular issues.
Wow.
Can lead to higher risk of stroke, dementia, and even early mortality because it weakens our immune system. Our sympathetic and parasympathetic certain nervous systems are just out of whack, and so it's looking for that foundational place to rest. And so it's not a healthy place to be physically.
Isn't that interesting? And well, you said it affects our mental health, our emotional health, physical health, and even spiritual health.
Yes.
And so what I hear you saying is, that's right. And so we do have to be careful with it. Why are so many people so lonely? I mean, it seems like we're more lonely than ever, yet we have social media, the culture, that has to be a factor. You write about that. What's the deal with loneliness?
I think it's just like so Satan, we know this in scripture, right? Satan is not creative. He's just going to repurpose things. And so I think it's just a repurposing of an original lie that we can find a better way to be connected in this way. We're designed for connection, we're created for connection. So hey, shiny new phone and social media, let's use that as a way to get connected. How many friends do you have? How many likes do you have? How many people are watching your viewing your videos and that kind of stuff? And eventually it just creeps in as a substitute for what was really meant to be and leaves us empty.
Yeah, isn't that interesting when you say that? Because, I immediately went to kids. Both of us have a youth ministry background. And, I see kids today more lonely than ever, more anxious than ever. And a lot of people blame it on the fact that they're scrolling for hours.
Right. Yep.
I just read that the average middle schooler is outside less than a prisoner. And the number one reason is because they're doing social media. So what you're saying is the culture plays partly to blame for our loneliness.
I would say yes. I would say, though, you think about the generations that have been raising the kids now that are getting ready to graduate or have graduated. Yeah. I'm a tech immigrant.
Huh?
You are as well, right? We
Right,
can remember what
exactly.
it was like when Google was founded, and when we
Right.
got the emails and
Hey,
all that kind of stuff.
the iPhone, it was 2007. I mean,
Right?
I was
Yeah.
already bald headed.
And so it's kind of, we can remember a time when this stuff wasn't
Right.
controlling in our lives, and what it was like to be outside until the sun goes down and the light comes on, and our mom yelling at us to get back for dinner, and
Right.
those kinds of things. This generation of kids
No.
doesn't. Now, I will say that there has been talk, and there's somewhat of a movement of coming
Yeah.
away from that too,
Right.
with tech-free homes and social media not until you're 18, and so I
Yeah.
think there's the tide's changing, but we've got a good set of generational individuals that struggle to keep relationships, that struggle to communicate emotions, that struggle to connect to God. And I'm not going to say it's just this. There's other
Right.
components too,
Sure.
but
Sure. Sure. So what I hear you saying is, we can't blame only culture, but we keep going to culture, for all these things. But you used a word, and I really like the word. Use the word alignment, coming back to alignment with connection, and that's important for us as parents, but it's also important for us with our kids
yes.
because we've talked about both. This is on both levels, and you say that over the past 10 years being a counselor, that you've had to realize that people are acutely aware of their loneliness, but they're kind of lost when it comes to a solution.
Hmm.
What did you mean
Hmm.
by that?
Well, I think if you were to remember Jay Leno when he was late night king and would go out and do jaywalking and just
Yeah,
ask people questions, like
yeah,
I think if you were to do that in any big city, out where you're at, out where I'm at, and just ask people, what have they ever experienced loneliness, or how do they feel
mhm.
lonely? We probably get
Sure,
95% would say yes,
sure,
right?
sure.
But then you ask them, okay, what are you doing to fix it? And they look at you dumbfounded.
Yeah,
I don't know.
right.
Um, I think part of it is because we've we've identified with it. It becomes a state of being instead of a state of feeling.
Yeah,
And when it becomes a state of being, we get wrapped up into spiraled out thinking, negative responses. I mean, all these types of things that
mm,
kind of keep us in that swirling kind of pit. And we've got to help people move from a state of being to, hey, this can be momentary. This can be for a season. This can be fleeting. And there's things that we can do to change that, but we've got to align our expectations. I have people that go, well, I want people to like me and see me right now. I'm like, well, when was the last time you left your house? When was the last
yes,
time you went to a small group at church? When was the last time you invited your friend out for coffee? Well, they don't invite me out for coffee. Well, I'm not asking that. Like, when was the last time you made the
yeah,
effort
right.
to go do that? It's going to take time.
Sure. And I appreciated your book so much, The Path Out of Loneliness, because I felt like you gave solutions, but they were not always easy solutions. When you're lonely or you're paralyzed, it's hard to get out of the house. It's hard to go
Hmm.
join a small group at church, even though they have them, and that's the purpose of them, is to
Right.
have
Yeah.
connection. I get that, but it's a simple answer, but not an easy answer.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. And what I tell my clients and the families that I work with is that they've got to become familiar with their patterns. I mean, all of us are going to experience bouts of loneliness. That's part of the human
Sure.
condition,
Sure.
this side of heaven.
Right.
There's things that we can do, choices we make that make that worse,
Right.
right? Or make it better.
Right.
But I tell parents all the time, like, for themselves and for their marriages and for their kids, how often do you let the course of the emotion run? And
Right.
they look at me like, what do you mean? Like, every
Sure.
emotion has a beginning and end and a climax.
Yeah.
Most of us don't get to the climax to figure out how long it's going to take to subside.
Yeah.
We want to get rid of it. So we numb it out
Yeah.
with video games or doom scrolling or,
Yeah.
fortunately, pornography or
Yeah.
alcohol or eating.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, if we would just stop,
Yeah.
pay attention to our rhythms of our emotions, go, oh, that only stays around for about 15 minutes. It's uncomfortable, but I'll be fine.
Yeah. That's a great statement. And I'm going to ask you a question about rhythms in the podcast later. But I found that in my own life, one time I said to Kathy, I was speaking at a conference and she goes, hey, how was it? And I said, you know what? In the midst of loads of people and loads of people, wanting my attention and, I thought the talks went okay. I was lonely.
Mm.
And she goes, well, why? Weren't people all around you? And I said, yeah, people were all around me, but I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel aligned. And you talk about in the
Mm-hmm.
book alignment and attachment. And what does healthy attachment look like?
That is the key that we've been chasing, I mean,
Mhm.
it's God's original intent is a
Yeah.
healthy attachment is, hey, I've got this need. I'm communicating that need to somebody,
Yeah.
and they show up and meet that need, and
That's
that
good.
creates a secure. I mean, it's
Right.
He's Dr. Daniel Siegel's in your neck of the woods down
Mhm.
in Southern California,
Yeah.
and
Right.
he talks a lot about this idea of three components of healthy attachment is to be seen
Mhm.
beyond the surface.
Yeah.
So not, hey, how you doing? Fine. It's,
Yeah.
oh, I notice you're not doing fine. What's going on?
Right. Right.
So we can tell a narrative. Feeling safe.
Uh-huh.
So if Mark or Jim are going to sit and listen to me, do I feel like they're really listening and they're
Right.
caring, and
Right.
then soothed? Will I walk away feeling better
Yeah.
than I
That's
did
good.
when I got there? And so when
Yeah.
people show up, I always tell people this: secure attachment doesn't mean you have to show up and meet the need. You may not have any clue what the need is, but you
Mhm.
see that they're asking you. You just show up. Your presence
Yeah.
meets the need, and in the process of leaning in relationally, then you're able to figure out, oh, like this person really needs more than I can give them. I'm not going to just drop them off at a counselor. I'm
Right.
going to stick with them and hang out, and
Right.
and so like you said, it's not that it's a hard answer, but it takes effort in the
Sure.
sense
No,
of
and sometimes
like,
it does take our effort, but for us to do that, we have to put ourselves in that. I'm in a small group. I've been in a small group for 22 years. Some of the most amazing men. We were talking about it before the podcast. We go fly fishing, and when we first got together, and these were all Christian leaders, amazing people. Two of them were the chairman of the elder boards at a church called Mariners, which I've been a part of, and just a plethora of great people. And we talked about sports. We did a Bible study, but we talked about sports. We talked about politics, and that was, we were guys.
mhm,
One day, one of the guys opened up his kimono and said, "I'm struggling in my marriage." And we all jumped in, and we've never been the same
mhm,
because he had the courage. He was probably feeling lonely, and he might have thought, wait, these guys have the perfect marriages, which we
right.
don't. And so he took a chance and said, struggling in the marriage, we jumped in and we got vulnerable. And vulnerability is another part of that, I think, in terms of being seen.
Yes.
I think sometimes where I see the hands and the feet and the mouthpiece of God is, obviously in scripture, but it's also when somebody loves me when I've been vulnerable enough to say, wow, I'm having a tough day or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. I think that's so key. My wife, Kathy, this was last weekend. I was speaking at WindShape, which you probably know WindShape.
Oh
It's
yeah,
the
I'm
Chick-fil-A.
heading back
Yeah.
up there in a couple weeks.
Oh, great. So it's a beautiful place. And so I was doing this, my thing that I do there on marriage. And a woman wrote her a note and said, I wish you were speaking. And Kathy can speak. They just don't have her necessarily do it there. But I want you to know that you are seen. I appreciate you. You're making a difference, and you're even making a difference through, Jim's messages. You know what
Mm,
my wife did? She cried at this
mm,
note. I looked at the note
mm.
and went, "Well, what a nice lady." I mean,
Yeah,
I honestly,
yeah.
I totally missed the empathetic side. But when Kathy read it to me, she choked up. Why?
Mm,
Because she was seen. She was sitting there having to listen to talks that she had heard the last time I was at WindShape,
right.
right? And yet somebody came to her and said, "I see you.
Mm,
I feel you. I
mm.
appreciate you." That's all she needed.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I was saying this today at the chapel that we know scientifically that when we're seen at that level, so when your small group guy opened up and shared,
Yeah.
it actually creates a syncing up of our our breathing,
Mm,
cardiovascular
love it.
system. So God encourages us. I was reading this article yesterday. Again, it's not correlation, causation. We can't say this is a fact,
Mhm,
but they were doing one study where they were monitoring the heart rates and the breathing
mm,
of individuals worshiping at a service.
mm.
And they said that after a certain period of time, everybody's and heart rate and breathing synced up with each other
Amazing.
in community. And
I had
so,
never thought of that.
when we're talking about loneliness, we're looking at your wife's comments, about you at camp. Well, why are you lonely? You're surrounded by people, but we're not. We're not. They need something from me. We're not synced up, or there's this. This just something's off. It actually we can trace that down to the physiology, and so that's
Yeah.
why I always tell parents, if you have a struggling kid, don't swoop in and lecture and try to fix them.
Mm.
Swoop in and give them a hug and sit with
Right.
them for a minute and
Right.
breathe with them.
Right.
You're going to calm them down in that way.
Yeah, no, so good. I actually remember a story from years ago where there was a man whose wife was dying,
Hmm.
and he was a pastor. And he said people would come by and stop, and they would offer prayer, they would offer suggestion, they would say all the right things. And then there was a guy in his congregation who was a truck driver, and he worked with his hands, and his hands were rough, and he had just lost his wife, and he never said anything. He would just hold his hand, and then he'd be there for a while and then say, maybe the game was on while the wife was just in that process of already hospice, but in the hospital. Say, okay, well, see, he didn't pray with him. I'm not saying you don't pray with people. He didn't
Sure.
offer a scripture. He just held his rough hand in that. And the pastor said, I never wanted him to leave. He said, I always wanted the other people to leave. Um,
Right.
and again, they weren't bad people. They were doing the best they could. But
Yeah.
I just thought that's that ministry of presence that you talk about in your book.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes more than advice, we just need presence. And
Yeah.
we've got to find those kinds of people. I love that. Well, listen, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about your grandpa. But we're going to take a real quick break. We'll be right back. Great conversation today with Mark Mayfield. The path out of loneliness. If you've experienced loneliness, and you know what, your kids experience loneliness, and you may not be aware of that. So we got to be in touch with that. All things Mark Mayfield are in our podcast notes. We'll be right back. Hi, Jim Burns here. I am so excited about what's going on at HomeWord. Some of you are just learning that things are changing around here, and one of the most exciting things changing is our new president, Marcus. And Marcus, tell us what's going on with HomeWord.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Really appreciate it. So excited to share with you, give you a glimpse of what God is doing in this new season at HomeWord. And it's a blend. It's a blend of new and tried and true. And our mission right now is, how do we take these 4 decades, these 40 years of ministry, of resources, of principles that God has been changing lives throughout the nation and beyond, and expand that, but also tether it to a younger generation. And the way we're going to do that is through a blend of tried and true resources and principles and events, as well as new initiatives. And I'll start off with the new. On the new side, we have a new website. We are rebranding. We've got new staff. We've got new faces and new voices to our growing social media presence, and that is wonderful. But also on the tried and true side, we've got a Refreshing Your Marriage retreat that has been an amazing, impactful event. We've got our conferences like Trainer for Trainers, and our resources like our books that we're going to continue to write and expand and change lives. Speaking of which, Jim, share with us the latest update of what's going on in the book world here at HomeWord.
You got it. And I'm excited about your leadership, and I'm excited about where we're going at HomeWord. It's going to be pretty incredible. We've got a book, Doing Life with Your Adult Children. We have other books, of course, but that's still on the bestseller list after 5 years. Even this month, it's on the bestseller list. And now there's a new one that's going to be coming out called When Your Adult Child Strays, Trading Heartache for Hope. And I'm doing this book right now, and there's going to be a course with it. And we have other books on sexuality and things like that that are really, really making a difference all around this world.
So with all the things going on right now at HomeWord, here's what you can do. God is putting in our heart this desire and this plan to expand our Refreshing Your Marriage conference that I recently attended, and it helped my wife and I have a breakthrough that God was working in our hearts for a while. But beyond that, I saw other couples experiencing the same thing. So we are going to expand our Refreshing Your Marriage conference, take it to other cities, and we want to be able to not only help make sure that happens, but also those that can't afford it, that need to be resourced and some scholarships. So we want to make sure nobody misses out on a chance to get their marriage refreshed and to draw closer to the Lord. So I'm asking you to make a special gift above and beyond to support that. Thank you so much, HomeWord.
Welcome back. So happy to have Mark Mayfield with us today. I have mentioned I have wanted him to be on our podcast for a long time, and actually has several great resources, and we'll ask him back again. Mark, in your book, you talked about when you were a pretty young person, you became one of the caregivers for your grandpa. Was
Yes.
it grandpa and grandma, or grandpa?
It was we call them Nana and Granddad, but
Yeah.
it was my grandparents. They were, I think, in their 40s when they had my mother, and so I came around. They were in their late 70s, early
Yeah.
80s. So
Yeah. Wow. And for you, that was a meaningful experience for you to learn how to do that at a young age. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, it was. I mean, my friends were going off and flipping burgers at McDonald's or Burger King, and my grandmother hired me to come and kind of take care of their property. They were pretty wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
and so she was able, blessed that they both died in the home, so they were blessed to not have to go to,
Oh,
a hospice or anything like that. But so she had me come and said, "Hey, your granddad needs help, getting from his chair to he had Parkinson's by that time, so getting his
oh,
chair back to the bedroom.
right.
Could you help with, helping go to the bathroom, helping do different things?"
Yeah.
And so he was a very stoic, quiet man.
Yeah.
He was the first engineer at Hewlett Packard
Wow.
back in the day, and so
Yeah.
didn't talk a lot. But I got to hang out with him. He would want to talk about philosophy. He'd want to listen to some classical music. He'd want to tell stories,
Mm.
and I was able to be a part of his salvation at 95,
Mm.
94, 95.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Just being close, and I think just seeing the impact he had on me, but
Yeah.
also the impact I had on him, just being
Yeah.
consistent. That was pretty cool.
No, I love that. There's actually a scripture that says we not only gave you the gospel of God, but we gave you our very lives as well because you've
Yeah.
become so dear to us.
Hmm.
And, I was thinking about that you gave him your life in a beautiful way, but you know what? He might have given you more than you
Oh yeah.
gave him, but in reality, it's that mutual thing. And
Hmm.
what's amazing is I find sometimes in my mentors, I'll have mentors who are older than me. I'm getting up there now, but mentors who are older than me, and really, truly, their presence
Hmm.
means so much to me, and I learn so much from them. But then they'll say, "Thank you so much for, taking the time," and I'm going, "Wait, no, thank you," kind of a thing.
Well, I think we at any stage of our life do. I think the question is do I still matter? Do I still
Yeah,
have? And I think that
so
comes
good.
back down to the key at the core of some of the loneliness
Yeah,
struggle is,
right.
um, do I have purpose? Do I have identity? Do I matter?
Yeah,
Does what I have to
right.
offer? And so when you get thanked from somebody that's older than you, I really
Yeah,
believe it's because they feel like they still have a place and a
yeah.
purpose. And I think
No,
that's
I
so
sure.
beautiful.
That's awesome. Now, I'm thinking of a lot of the parents who listen to the
Mm,
podcast, and they are aware, many of them are, that their kids are lonely. And
yeah.
and the way they say, well, get out of the house, go meet some friends, go join a club, go to the church youth group, whatever. They probably need something more than
Hmm.
that. When a parent begins to understand that their child is lonely, and maybe they thought it was a personality issue where they were, just being quiet, or they just wanted to play video games or whatever it might be. What does a parent do?
Well, I talk with parents all the time. It goes back to that being seen
Yeah.
piece.
Power of presence too. That's what
Yeah.
your phrase was, power of presence. Yeah.
Yeah. I just tell parents, I said, when was the last time you stared into your kids' eyes until they felt
Oh,
uncomfortable? And they're like, well, they don't let me. I'm like, well, the average gaze in America is 3 seconds.
wow.
You can't learn anything from a gaze of 3 seconds. I said, I tell the story that I used to swaddle my kids up when they were babies, put them on the bed, and just stare into their eyes until it was time for bed. There's something just mesmerizing about that and just
It's
beautiful
so
about
cool.
that. But I said, if we don't, if we're not students of our kids, we're going to miss the nuances of their struggle.
So good.
And so I say my almost 17-year-old, I've got an 11-year-old, and then God surprised us, so I got a 4-year-old as
Yeah.
well.
You're
But
busy. You're a busy boy as well as all the other stuff you do.
yeah,
Gee.
and so I will look at my kids and I'll study them. I'll study their behavior. I'll
Mm,
study their nonverbals and their emotions. But look in their eyes. They know that they have to look in Dad's eyes at least once a day for me to assess how they're doing. And then what I'll say is, hey, I notice that you're not doing well. I'm ready to listen when you want to talk, and I think it's really key.
so good.
Those verbs, like, I'm not ready to talk when you are, because they'll think that's
Yeah.
a lecture.
Yeah.
So I'll just say I'm ready to listen when you want to talk,
It's
and
really good.
without fail, 12 at midnight, 11 o'clock at night, or whenever they want to talk,
Right.
we have these conversations. And so I'll listen. I'll ask. I try to teach parents to ask open-ended questions, be
So good.
curious, don't give advice, and then at the end I'll say, okay, thank you. I love you. I love you. Speak truth over them, that kind of stuff. But then say, what do you want me to do with this?
Mm, so
And
good.
you give them some purpose and some power. So my
Yeah.
17-year-old goes, well, some days she'll say, can you fix it? Okay, let's talk about that. Other days she goes, you did it. You just listened, and that's all I needed.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh crap, now I'm dysregulated. So I'm gonna go. I gotta go call my therapist or my friend to go release
Exactly.
that kind of stuff. But I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
and that's all she wants is just somebody to listen.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
I
Great
think parents
statement.
just need to know, like, we've got to slow down. I
Yeah.
get on parents all the time going, you
Yeah.
should not be out every night of the week doing something with
No.
your kids. Like,
No.
create space to slow down
Yeah.
because you're going to
No.
miss it.
Boy, I when I graduated from grad school, I didn't stay for the graduation because I was getting out of town to go to do youth ministry. And a friend of mine wrote me a note and he said, "Dear Jim, we missed you at graduation. If the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy."
Mm-hmm.
And just love David. And I laughed because he's a pastor in a church and he was at a pastor's conference I was speaking at. We went out to, and he was just telling me how busy he was. I said, well, a guy in seminary one day wrote me and said, if the devil can't make, he goes, that's good. Who did that? I go, you did, you punk.
That's
He had
hilarious.
forgotten. But I think sometimes even in the busyness, we can't, the staring, I'm going back to the stare. What you just said is worth everybody listening and then sending it to somebody, because every parent has to learn that you don't always have to fix your kids. And sometimes you help fix your kids by just simply going, let me listen and do it on their time, not necessarily our time. We're trying to be too efficient. We have I would imagine he's a friend of yours too, but one of my very good friends is a guy named John Townsend. And I used to just crack up with him because he'd go, I get all of my best conversations with my boys on the second lap. And I go, what? He goes, yeah, we walk around the block and they usually don't say anything. And then on the second lap is when they would kind of say, oh, I had this girl broke up with me, or, I'm having trouble at school or whatever it might be. And I've never forgotten that it's kind of like fishing. You just have to wait, sometimes. And, I would do that with my kids. With my daughter, Christy, I would take once a week when she was in high school, I took her to breakfast. A's breakfast burritos, not good for your health, but the most amazing breakfast. If you ever come to Dana Point, California, I'll take you there, and they're just great. So we would do that, and half the time I wouldn't get anything from her. We would talk about snowboards, so we would talk about why she doesn't have a cell phone and everybody else has a cell phone, any of that kind of stuff. But then she would one day just go, Dad, boom, and there it was.
Yep.
And me always having an agenda in my pocket, I wanted more from her on that. And it didn't always happen, but when it happened, it was right. And I think parents have to hear that and understand that, in a big way. And, again, parents, I want you to hear the power of presence, because we can live with our kids and not be present with them. Truly, as Mark just said, when was the last time you stared in their eyes? I did this last night. For some reason, I was sitting at I was actually reading the book, The Path Out of Loneliness. And Kathy was at the table and I was wondering what she was doing. And it wasn't like staring for deep love. I was just staring at her. And all of a sudden she goes, you're staring at me. Why are you doing that? So I was just, I was just thinking, and I was just, staring at you. And she goes, well, that's a little creepy. And you know what? We actually had some beautiful moments after that, because she called me creepy. How dare her? And then, but she appreciated it. And honestly, I was just caught staring at her, and it wasn't a deep, dark thing. And it wasn't on all that romantic. It was just literally, I was just staring at her. And there you go. So that's the kinds of things we can do. I want you to talk about some practical solutions. The last part of your book is just filled with great practical solutions. And so any parent who's reading it, about not only their own life. Now, again, this is a book that reaches you personally. This book touched me personally. At the same time, I'm thinking from a parent standpoint, from a marriage standpoint, things like that. And you had some steps to healing. And the first step, one, was acknowledge the loneliness you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that.
Well, how many of us, especially in our Christian kind of culture, we ask each other how you're doing, and we keep it together, fine, blessed, better than I deserve, all that kind of stuff. And we're dying on the inside or whatever. Right. So side note for a second, I tell people, stop asking people how they're doing unless you got 15 minutes to sit with their answer.
Oh, it's good.
So that's part of it, is that to acknowledge means to go, you know what? Yeah. I hate to admit this, but I'm lonely. And what that does is, kind of taking on some First John language. We're dragging that out of the darkness into the light. We're illuminating the statement that I am lonely. Okay, now I got to do something about it.
Yeah.
I can't hide it anymore. I've got to do something about it.
Now, that's a beautiful statement, out of darkness, because loneliness is dark.
Yes.
And when we admit it, it didn't take the loneliness necessarily away, but it actually was the first step to getting, some help because we admitted it. And interesting enough, we say that to people. I mean, there's people who do not have an empathetic bone in their body who might not help us, but typically we're not saying that to them because they're not safe anyway. But when we say that to somebody and they embrace our loneliness and they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, but their presence makes a difference. That is a great first step. So again, if you're lonely, find somebody that you trust and that you believe will, will come alongside you, and there you go. Step 2 was taking ownership of changing your path. That's a big step. I mean, you go out, but now you're going to take ownership of changing your changing your path. Talk about that.
Yeah, I've got people that hate me for that step
I love that step
because we've got to take stock. Because here's what I see a lot, and I'm sure you do too. Woe is me. The world has happened to me. I have no agency in it. I have I can't change it. That's not true. We have the one thing that all of us have in common is we have choice.
Yeah,
and we have choice to look at and take stock of it. So when we call something out, bring it into the light, then we're dealt with, okay, what do? We can go back in darkness. People do. We can just take it back into the darkness. Or we can go, what things have I been doing that have contributed to this loneliness becoming more pervasive?
Yeah.
And we take stock of, okay, do I need to get a dumb phone? Do I need to cancel my cable? Do I need to say yes when somebody reaches out and says, "Hey, we go out for dinner," or say yes to that small group, or whatever it might be. We just need to own our choices and go, okay, I need to assess, adjust, and maybe rethink how I'm doing what I'm doing.
And what I appreciate about you saying that is because we have to take ownership of however we're going to change on our path, but it might be counseling. The Bible says where there's no counsel, the people fall in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. You hear patterns every day and you can help them because you have the ability to do that. You also said in your book, sometimes you don't need a counselor. Sometimes what you need is a friend, or you need a small group, or you need to go get in shape by walking or whatever it might be, being God's creation. A lot of times for me, I'll say, I'm closed up. I just need to go for a walk. We live at the beach and I just need to go for a walk at the beach. And people look at me like, what's that going to do? Actually, sometimes that's better than having a conversation with a person.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that pulls into prayer because I feel closer to God when I'm in creation. And so there's just things we can do. But again, if somebody was really intensely, struggling with loneliness and there is a path, they have to take ownership sometimes of going and talking with someone.
Right. Could be a spiritual director, pastor, coach.
Right.
Again, I always tell people it doesn't have to end up with a counselor. Not everybody needs a counselor.
Right.
To that level, but maybe you start there, and then if you got a good counselor, they'll kind of titrate you off into finding other community. But Chap Clark as well, and his research about teenagers need 5 safe people in their life. I think it applies to us as adults too.
Nope. I totally agree. And Kathy and I chose that because of Chap, probably because we're good friends. But we chose to have 6 adults in our kids' lives. And to this day, now my kids are in their 30s now, but to this day, all 6 of those people, except one has passed on, but all 6 of those people, different people for different kids too, are important to their life.
Yeah.
And I feel good about as a parent is that Pam and Craig are going to help my girls. And they're going to, and I trust them, and I believe, and they're wonderful Christ followers. And they're going to go to Pam and Craig sometimes when they're not going to go to us. They have a different way, a different approach. How great is that? We've got to be able to do things like that. Step 3 was actively use the tools given to you to, what does it say here? To enact change. And I was a little confused about that one. So I want you to, part of it, I think you just gave the answer partly. But when you say actively use the tools you've been given, now you've given a lot of tools in the book, but what do you mean by that exactly?
I think part of it is the tools in the book, but I also think part of it is I'm a strength-based. I like to do strength-based stuff. So I always have people in my office go, let's stop for a second. You actually are better than you think you are. let's make a list. Get out your journal and make a list
Yeah,
of
it's good.
all the strengths. All
I love that.
you tell me that your life is falling apart, but here you are, and you're healthy. You look good.
Right.
You're not. I'm not having to take you to the hospital right now for an evaluation. Like, I kind of joke about that a little bit with them, but I'm like, so there's things that you're doing that you're not realizing you're doing that are helping you. What are they? And
Yeah.
so we spend time really peeling back the layers
Good.
of the tools that they have in their own life, because they could
Yeah,
then they'll be like, oh
that's right.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I've actually I can do this, and then they'll take the stuff, the other stuff in the book too that really
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
add layers to that. But um, obviously we're our own worst critics sometimes, and so we
No.
don't have a chance to look at that unless somebody helps us.
No, that's so good. Man, I wish I had more time, but I've got two quick questions. I want to get to them. One is about rhythms versus balance.
Yes.
I thought you did a really good job helping us understand that. Explain what rhythms, balance, what the difference is,
Yeah,
what that means.
I'll do that real quick. I always look at balance as the old split, the plate spinner on Johnny Carson show that would get the dowels out, the circus guy, and spin the
Loved it.
plates, and he'd
You and I
get
must
four or
have the
five.
same sense of humor. Like you've just mentioned Jay Leno and Johnny Carson. That also dates us, I'm telling you,
A little bit,
um,
yeah.
but awesome. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry
Yeah,
to
and so
interrupt.
no, it was just, but you watch him, and that's pretty cool. And then he gets like 6 or 7 up, and he can't keep them all up.
Right,
And I think balance is a myth. I hate the whole work life balance
right,
conversation,
right.
because it's more about rhythms. And I look at rhythms,
That's good.
from a musical standpoint, that um, you know what we need to add into our lives has to fit with the tempo that we're moving.
Yeah,
So think about a drummer. If the tempo is moving really fast, the drummer can only do a couple things.
yeah.
But if it's slowing down a little bit, he can get creative. He can do some
Okay,
different
that's
stuff like that.
really good.
And so I always tell families, go look at the tempo in your life. We go through seasons. You've
Yeah,
got 4 little kids right now. There's very little you should be saying yes to,
yeah,
except for how do I disciple my kids and get them into community and that kind of stuff.
right,
As you get older and they get older, you might be able to say yes to more things because your
right.
tempo's slowing
No, that's
down.
a good point.
But this goes for work. This goes for all these kinds of things. Um, but we don't do that because we think we got to say yes to everything, and we burn out. And so I always tell people, when do you notice the tire on your car? When it goes flat.
Sure.
And that's when we begin to notice that maybe our rhythms are out of whack, is when we burn out, and we got to take a step back and go. And I think to me, that's a huge contributor to loneliness, because we don't have time for self-care, relational care,
Right,
spiritual care, connection, all that kind
right,
of stuff.
right. I really appreciate you saying that. Sometimes on this podcast, I'll tell people. So every morning I go through the 1 year Bible. I've done it since 1983, which is not just that 1 year, but every time. And it's not all that dramatic, but in those quiet times and in my journaling, that's where I sometimes get in touch with my loneliness or my, just because I take time to do that.
Right.
And I'm surely not saying I have it all together, but I'm saying in those moments, I think some of the anointing of God comes from us taking the time to listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're right now in Leviticus, which I'm in Leviticus, and I'm not like going, this is the greatest scripture of the world. God, why did you? I mean, I wanted to ask him, like, why did you? I just read 11 pages of this. Why? What? I don't get it. I mean, there's reasons, and I just killed anybody who loves theology and loves Leviticus, I realize. But again, I think you're so right that we've got to develop rhythms in our life that will make us healthier.
Mm.
And you mentioned faith community, and you talk about this in your book. But where does our faith and our faith communities come into our own healing with loneliness?
Well, we've got to first, you mentioned this, we've got to first figure out who's safe and who isn't.
Mhm.
It's going to take time. So if
Yeah,
we've been hurt by the church and faith communities,
yeah,
we still need them, right?
right,
The trauma happens in relationship, but also trauma can only heal in relationship. And so we've got
right.
to find safe people to do that. So I always tell people, like, act like you're getting into a cold pool, dip your toe in
Mhm.
and kind of give it see what's going on. And if you feel comfortable, then stand on the step
Yeah,
and then work your way in. But
yeah,
many of us that are lonely, have experienced loneliness. We want to dive in, and we want people to know our story and get all this kind of stuff. And that tends to scare people away. And so we've got to take our time and build, it didn't take you didn't build these deep relationships with your small group overnight.
no,
It
no,
took time, intentionality,
right,
and practice and persistence. And so
right,
I think, faith communities can be super healing, We just got to
Yeah.
make sure that we're wise and discerning in how
Yeah.
we choose them.
No, exactly. You're right. There are toxic faith communities out there, and we know that. We have to admit that and run from those. It's not like we need to stay in that unless God directly says, "Be here to be a healing agent."
Sure.
But then you got to have some healing from outside if you're called to that kind of a that kind of a thing. Such a great conversation today. The book is called The Path Out of Loneliness. Here is, if you're watching on the YouTube, it's a great cover. I love the cover. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Now, again, all things Mark Mayfield are in our podcast notes. And before we go, I just want to make a couple of comments. And I'm just so grateful for Mark and all that he does and who he is. And, it's funny because we haven't spent a lot of time together, but I hear so many great things about him as I kind of, float around the world as well. So, anyway, I just want to give you a couple of thoughts right before I leave. First of all, find replenishing relationships. A lot of what we've talked about is that we need to connect, we need to be seen. We are not meant to do life alone. We are not meant to go through life without people who replenish us. That's not a selfish thing, by the way. So I figured and I've said this on the podcast before, but there are VDPs and VIPs, very draining people. They all come.
Yes.
And there are VIPs. Well, a very draining person might be your alcoholic sister-in-law who wants money and you can't just ignore her. But at the same time, you can put some boundaries on her. But let's talk about VIPs. The interesting side about VIPs is they don't oftentimes find you. Sometimes they do. You find them.
Mm-hmm.
And for me personally, and it's exactly what we've been talking about, it's my small group. I talk about the small group all the time on this podcast. It's my church. It was interesting to me that Mark talked about worship and how you sync. Sometimes when I'm with Kathy, standing next to her, as I was Sunday, and I'd been 4 weekends in a row gone speaking, and this weekend, again, I'm going to be gone. So it's not like I'm with her all the time on this, but sometimes she's standing with me, even if we're farther away. I mean, if we're someplace else, she travels with me sometimes. But, I think we sync. And there's even people who say that, if you go to worship twice a month at your church, you're going to have a better marriage, even the statistic of staying married. So do that. Find mentors, and again, there are mentors out there, but you don't have to go up to somebody and go, will you mentor me? Just start. Ask somebody to go to lunch, ask somebody to go to dinner. Some of your mentors, I have said, some of my mentors I met after they died because they were in books. So C.S. Lewis has mentored me. He doesn't know it. I don't know him. I've never met him. He was, dead before I came along. But anyway, find mentors. And some of them should be people from your church and whatnot. And I think also one of the greatest statements in the Bible is when God says to us, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So you're lonely. I understand it. And I'm not just saying because I gave that scripture that's going to change everything. But listen, we have a God who says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And some of us feel forsaken. Sometimes, maybe your dad left early on or your mom left or, there's things that have happened. Lean into God in those darker moments, even if you don't feel him. I love the book of Psalms and the book of Proverbs. And I challenge people to read a psalm or a proverb a day. In fact, if you read 5 psalms a day and you read 1 proverb, you could read it 12 times in a year because that's going through the scriptures. But like for me, because I do the 1 year thing, it's always a psalm, always a proverb within that. And there's comfort in those 2 books in the Bible. And it daily reminds me that I am not alone. And I want to tell you, if I was sitting here with you, I would cup your face and say, you are not alone. You are loved. You're loved by our master designer, our God. You're also loved by people around you. And maybe you don't even know it or feel it. And I know this sounds kind of weird and it doesn't mean to be creepy, but in a sense, even though we have a relationship that's farther away, I want to tell you that I love you and I pray for you as well. And some of you I don't know, of course. But anyway, just a little mush there before we end this. Okay. Time to close off this podcast. Again, my thanks to Mark. Great conversation today. Thanks for listening on one of the many podcast platforms we have worldwide and for watching us if you're on the HomeWord YouTube channel. It's absolutely blowing my mind how many people from all around the world are listening, and I am so honored by your presence. Just listening and watching. And if there's anything that we can do at HomeWord, do not hesitate to go to HomeWord, WORD.com. Until next time, I'm Jim Burns.